What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors is confronted by a television host who refuses to show basic respect? When Jimmy Kimmel questioned Denzel Washington's 40-year career choices, the legendary actor responded with a lesson in dignity that left the entire studio audience breathless. That moment became one of the most unforgettable moments in talk show history. Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get into our story. The lights were shining brightly in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio that night. The red and blue tones of the set design promised an entertaining atmosphere that would be filled with laughter throughout the evening. Hundreds of people sitting in the audience seats were eagerly awaiting the start of the show. The lights flashed, the music rose, and Jimmy Kimmel stepped onto the stage. "Good evening, folks," he greeted the viewers with his usual energy. "Tonight we have a very special guest, a two-time Oscar winner, one of Hollywood's most respected actors. With his new film Justice for All, Denzel Washington." As applause filled the studio, Denzel Washington stepped onto the stage charismatically in his navy blue suit, walking with confident steps toward Jimmy Kimmel. The two men shook hands, and Washington sat down in the guest chair. Everything started normally. The first few minutes between Kimmel and Washington passed with standard questions and answers about the new film. Denzel was answering the questions with his usual grace and professionalism. "You play a judge in this film," said Kimmel. "A principled man who wants to make big changes in our justice system. Could we call this a typical Denzel Washington role?" Washington smiled. "Every role is unique, Jimmy. This character believes that justice should be served not only in courtrooms but also on the streets. He's willing to risk his own career and even his life to expose corruption within the system." Kimmel nodded, but the expression that appeared on his face was the first sign that the conversation would take a different direction. The experienced camera operators in the studio must have noticed this, as they slowly began to zoom in on Denzel Washington's face. "So you're playing the man fighting for what's right, principled guy, roll again," said Kimmel, with a slightly mocking tone in his voice. "Aren't we getting a bit tired of seeing you in these types of roles, Denzel? I mean, it feels like you've been playing the same character for 40 years. Justice warrior Denzel, honest cop Denzel, moral teacher Denzel." There was a sudden tense silence in the studio. A few people chuckled, but most were waiting with curiosity to see what would happen. Kimmel's taunt had gone beyond friendly talk show banter. The smile on Denzel Washington's face slowly faded. He straightened slightly in his seat, his gaze sharpened, but he still maintained his calm. Everyone in the studio was holding their breath, waiting for Washington's response. Washington thought for a moment before speaking. Even this moment intensified the tense atmosphere. Then, in his characteristic deep and calm voice, he began to speak. "Interesting comment, Jimmy," he said, carefully choosing each word. "In my 40-year career, I've portrayed many different characters, from Malcolm X to Detective Alonzo Harris in Training Day, from Coach Herman Boone in Remember the Titans to alcoholic pilot Whip Whitaker in Flight. Comedy, drama, action. I've done films of every genre." Kimmel tried to interject. "Yes, but in all of them there's a kind of—" Washington raised his hand, politely but firmly stopping Kimmel. "Let me finish, Jimmy," he said, his voice soft but authoritative. A few "oh" sounds rose from the audience. "Look," Washington continued, "if you want to talk about my acting choices, you need to understand those choices correctly first. I don't categorize characters as same or different. Each one has their own story, their own struggle, their own spirit. I focus on playing them well, on offering the audience a genuine experience." The studio was engulfed in silence. The expression on Kimmel's face showed that he realized this conversation had departed from the show's entertaining tone. But Washington wasn't finished yet. "And you know, Jimmy," he said, now fixing his eyes directly on Kimmel's, "as an actor, our greatest duty is to present truth to the audience. Not one-dimensional, simple entertainment. The truth about people's lives, struggles, victories, and tragedies." Kimmel could no longer hide his discomfort. Sure, he said, waving his hand in the air. "I was just joking, you know." "A joke?" Washington's voice had changed. It was now deeper, more authoritative. But still, he wasn't shouting or raising his voice. "I don't think it was, Jimmy. I think this was an attempt to belittle someone else's career, art, and consistency to gain attention on television. Kimmel's eyes widened. At this point, the flow of the program had completely changed. It was no longer Jimmy Kimmel's entertaining talk show but a serious conversation where Denzel Washington was setting the boundaries. Well, why do you prefer certain types of roles? Kimmel asked, trying to change the subject. I mean, why don't you do more comedy, for example? Washington smiled, but this smile didn't reach his eyes. You see? You're simplifying again. My first question would be, how many of my films have you watched, Jimmy? I played comedy in Much Ado About Nothing. I played romantic comedy in The Preacher's Wife. But let me tell you something, I choose stories, not genres. I choose characters, not stereotypes. Applause broke out in the studio. The audience appreciated this sincere and powerful defense. Kimmel now realized he needed to back down. You're right, I'm sorry, he said, with feigned sincerity. I just wanted to have a fun conversation. Entertainment isn't about putting others down, Jimmy, said Washington. His voice now had a teacher's tone. Entertainment is about being clever, respectful, and genuinely funny. Saying that I've played the same role in my 40-year career is neither clever, nor respectful, nor funny. It's just an unprepared and thoughtless comment. Kimmel had started to sweat. He had completely lost control of the program. The audience was no longer on his side. They were clearly supporting Washington. You like to play characters who do the right thing. That's what I was trying to say. Kimmel attempted to recover. Washington nodded slightly. And what's wrong with that, Jimmy? Why should telling stories that remind the world about the importance of righteousness, honesty, and justice be something to criticize? There are already thousands of stories in Hollywood and media in general telling people to chase power, money, and success. If I choose to give my audience a different message, that's my artistic choice. This response drew more applause from the studio. Kimmel was now completely cornered. He looked to the producer on the side for help, but help didn't come. Yes, you're right, of course, he finally said, his shoulders drooping. We need principled actors like you in Hollywood. This time Washington smiled sincerely. Thank you, he said. And I want to tell you something else, Jimmy. This isn't just about Hollywood. As media, as journalists, as talk show hosts, you carry responsibilities in a world we all live in. Asking questions and entertaining is your job. But respecting others' work, careers, and choices while doing so is also your job. Kimmel could only nod now. Each word from Washington diminished him further. Across from him stood not just an actor, but a true sage. Do you think the media fulfills this responsibility? Washington asked, with the roles now reversed, the questioner becoming the questioned. Kimmel swallowed. Not always, he said honestly. Sometimes chasing ratings and clicks seems more appealing than doing the right thing. That's honesty, said Washington, appreciatively. The foundation of true comedy is also this honesty. Not putting people down, but being able to blend truth with humor. During this dialogue, everyone in the studio was aware they were witnessing a historic moment. A talk show host had never before been given such an elegant but definitive lesson by his guest on his own program. Well, let's talk more about your film, said Kimmel, trying to completely change the subject. The judge character you play in Justice for All? Do you have anything else you want to ask, Jimmy? Asked Washington with a gentle smile. Because I'm not finished yet. I want to clarify this always playing the same role issue. Kimmel reluctantly nodded. Sure, please continue, he said, also giving the audience a displeased look. I'm saying this for the viewers, said Washington, now turning to the cameras. As an actor, portraying various characters is important, of course. But consistency is also important. The consistency you see in my films isn't playing the same character, but staying true to certain values. Values like justice, truth, courage. These values are my personal compass, which is why they are reflected in the projects I choose. The audience applauded again. Washington continued his speech. And you know, Jimmy, you have a compass too. A compass you use when deciding which topics to cover in this program every night, who to invite, and how to treat them. The question is, where is this compass guiding you? To easy laughs, or to meaningful conversations? Kimmel couldn't answer this question. He just sat there, gently but definitively reprimanded by Denzel Washington in front of millions of viewers. Let's go to a commercial, he finally said, averting his eyes from Washington. "Let's not go yet, Jimmy," said Washington, raising his hand. "Because this is important. You, me, and everyone here are making choices about what kind of media we want. Do we want media that degrades, belittles, and simplifies people? Or do we want media that inspires, questions, deepens?" Not a sound could be heard in the studio. Everyone was listening to Denzel Washington's words. This was no longer just a talk show, but a manifesto, a lesson. "And you know what's interesting?" Washington continued. "When I came here tonight, I was excited to have a fun conversation on your program. I wanted to promote my film, maybe share a few moments. But now here we are, in front of millions of people, talking about media ethics. Because you chose to belittle my career." Kimmel now appeared completely crushed. "Denzel, I really am sorry," he said, this time in a sincere tone. "You're right. I crossed a line." Washington was silent for a moment, then with a warm smile, "Your apology is accepted, Jimmy," he said. "We all make mistakes. What's important is learning from them." The atmosphere in the studio suddenly changed. Tension gave way to relief. People began to breathe again. "Now," said Washington, comfortably leaning back in his chair, "we can talk about my film." Kimmel smiled gratefully. "Yes, please," he said. "Why does the judge character you play in Justice for All seek justice outside the system rather than staying within it?" Washington began to answer the question, but everyone in the studio was now aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. Denzel Washington hadn't just given Jimmy Kimmel a lesson. He had delivered a powerful message about respect, ethics, and responsibility to the entire media world. After the program ended, Kimmel and Washington met backstage. The cameras were no longer recording. "Denzel, I really am sorry," said Kimmel, with sincere regret. "I know I crossed a line." Washington put his hand on Kimmel's shoulder. "It's okay, Jimmy," he said. "But remember, media isn't just entertainment. It's power. And with great power comes great responsibility." Kimmel nodded. "I learned an important lesson tonight," he said. Washington smiled. "We all learn something every day," he said. "The most important thing I've learned in my 40-year career is to respect people and their stories. That's my job as an actor." The two men shook hands and parted ways. But the echoes of that night would last much longer. The next morning, that historic encounter between Denzel Washington and Jimmy Kimmel had gone viral on social media. Millions of people were sharing the video and quoting Washington's words on media ethics and artistic integrity. The YouTube video titled, "Denzel Washington Destroys Jimmy Kimmel," had reached 15 million views within 24 hours. Twitter hashtags #DenzelTeachesRespect and #KimmelSchooled were trending. Media critics wrote that Washington had displayed the most elegant but effective rebuttal in talk show history. Washington delivered a media lesson that will go down in television history, the New York Times had written. Without getting angry, raising his voice, or cursing, but simply by stating the truth, he cornered a talk show host. Variety magazine had published an analysis titled, "Denzel Washington didn't just promote a film on Jimmy Kimmel Live, he presented a media manifesto." On social media, people were sharing Washington's words and telling their own experiences. Many were discussing how the media frequently simplifies people and puts them in boxes. Tonight, Denzel Washington didn't just defend himself, he spoke for all artists. "Media needs to stop belittling art and artists," a famous film critic had written. Other celebrities also began sharing messages of support for Washington. Meryl Streep had tweeted, "What Denzel said last night was what all artists have been feeling for years. I'm grateful to him." Samuel L. Jackson wrote on Instagram, "That's a real actor. That's a real man." Denzel Washington spoke for all of us. A few days later, Jimmy Kimmel made an official apology at the opening of his program. "The other day I was disrespectful to Denzel Washington," he said, looking at the cameras. "I belittled his career and artistic choices. This was a big mistake, and I apologize. Denzel isn't just a magnificent actor, he's also an extraordinary human being. I apologize to him and to our viewers." Kimmel's apology was found sincere, but the discussion on the internet continued for weeks. People were questioning how the media should treat celebrities, artists, and people in general, demanding a more respectful and deeper media. This incident proved once again that Denzel Washington wasn't just an actor, but also an important voice on media and societal values. The lesson he gave that night in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio wasn't just directed at a talk show host, but at the entire media world and millions of viewers. And perhaps most importantly, Washington did this while maintaining his usual grace and calm, not responding to provocation and belittlement with the same weapons. Instead, by speaking in a thoughtful, measured but decisive way, he showed how real power and authority are displayed. This was a moment that Hollywood and the media wouldn't soon forget. Denzel Washington hadn't just given Jimmy Kimmel a lesson. He had reminded the whole world about the importance of respect, integrity, and honesty. A month after the incident, Washington's new film, Justice for All, was released. The film was a powerful justice drama in which Washington portrayed an idealistic judge who risked his own career and life to expose corruption in the justice system. Film critics praised Washington's performance, and many also mentioned the Kimmel incident. Washington's stance against Jimmy Kimmel was the real-life reflection of the principles his character in Justice for All possesses, Rolling Stone magazine had written. The film broke box office records, making $78 million in its opening weekend. This was one of the best openings of Washington's career. Many analysts attributed this extraordinary success partly to the respect Washington gained in the Kimmel incident. Viewers appreciate the consistency between the Denzel Washington they see on screen and the Denzel Washington they see in real life, a film critic had written. He's a man who stands for his principles not just in his films, but in real life as well. The film crossed the $100 million mark in its first week, becoming one of the most successful films in Washington's career. On social media, campaigns were launched with the hashtag #WatchDenzelTeachRespect, and people were sharing that they were going to see the film after the lesson Washington gave to Kimmel. Watch Justice for All tonight. Denzel Washington isn't just a magnificent actor, he's also a magnificent human being. The lesson he gave to Jimmy Kimmel shows his true character, a Twitter user had written. Within the first 2 weeks of its release, the film made $200 million, becoming one of the most successful films in Washington's career. This success created big waves in Hollywood. Washington became even stronger after the Kimmel incident, Variety magazine had written. He's now not just an actor, but also a symbol of respect, integrity, and standing up for principles. Meanwhile, things had gotten a bit difficult for Jimmy Kimmel. The program's ratings had slightly declined, and he was still being criticized on social media. Kimmel decided to make changes to the format of his program. In a meeting with the program's producers, "I want a more respectful and deeper format," said Kimmel. Washington was right. Media has a responsibility, and I want to fulfill this responsibility. Kimmel's new format would be less sarcastic, more thoughtful and respectful in tone. He would have deeper conversations with his guests, asking more thoughtful questions about their careers and choices. This change also echoed in the media world. Other talk show hosts also began to review their formats. Stephen Colbert mentioned something he called the Denzel Washington effect on The Late Show. "Washington gave all of us a lesson on media ethics," said Colbert. "And I'm taking this lesson seriously. Humor is a powerful tool, but this power comes with responsibilities." Jimmy Fallon also made a similar statement on The Tonight Show. "We will do our best to be more respectful to our guests and viewers," he said. The lesson Denzel Washington gave to Jimmy Kimmel was a wake-up call for all of us. These changes were well received by viewers. The program's ratings began to rise, and positive comments increased on social media. "Talk shows are finally starting to grow up," a Twitter user had written. Washington's lesson affected the entire industry, and that's a great thing. 3 months after the incident, Denzel Washington was a guest on Oprah Winfrey's program. This was his first major television interview after the Kimmel incident. Oprah, with her usual directness, got to the point. "Denzel, what do you think about that moment with Jimmy Kimmel? The whole world watched that video and appreciated your stance." Washington smiled with his characteristic calmness. "You know, Oprah, I always try to be myself," he said. "That night I was just being myself. When someone tried to belittle my 40-year career, I couldn't allow that. But I also didn't want to cross the boundaries of respect while doing so." Oprah nodded, asking, "How did you maintain your calm?" Most people would get angry in that situation. Washington thought for a moment. "One of the most important things I've learned in life is this. The moment you're strongest is when you maintain your calm. Anger is a sign of weakness. Real power is being able to control yourself even in difficult situations. These words created a new viral wave on social media. The hashtag #DenzelWisdom trended on Twitter with millions of shares. Oprah asked, "Well, how do you want the media to treat you and other artists?" Washington simply said, "Respect. The media's job is to ask questions, criticize, analyze. But while doing this, it needs to show respect for the work, career, and humanity of the person it's facing. This applies not just for artists, but for everyone." Oprah asked, "Do you think the lesson you gave to Jimmy Kimmel will create a change in the media?" Washington said, "I hope so. But real change doesn't start with one moment or one person. Real change starts when all of us decide to be a little more thoughtful, a little more respectful, a little more humane in every encounter, every day." This interview further strengthened the impact of Washington's lesson to Kimmel. People appreciated not just his stance in that moment, but also his attitude after the event. Washington knows how to remain humble and thoughtful even after winning a victory, a social media user had written. This is a true example of leadership. 6 months after the incident, Columbia Journalism School added a new course to its curriculum, Respect and Ethics in Media. In the first week of the course, students were shown the video of the Washington-Kimmel confrontation. Harvard University's Faculty of Communication also opened a similar course, Ethical Debates in Popular Culture, the Washington-Kimmel Case. These courses attracted great interest among media students. Students analyzed Washington's attitude, discussed Kimmel's mistakes, and developed suggestions for a more ethical media. This movement that started in the academic world gradually spread to the media industry. Major media organizations began giving ethical communication seminars to their employees. These trainings led to a noticeable change in the tone and approach of media. Interviews became deeper, more thoughtful, and more respectful. Talk shows began to have more meaningful dialogues with their guests, instead of cheap jokes and sarcastic comments. "We can talk about a Denzel effect in the media," said a media analyst. The lesson Washington gave to Kimmel affected the entire industry and changed it in a better direction. This change was also noticed and appreciated by viewers. The ratings of talk shows and news programs began to rise. On social media, more respectful and in-depth content was being shared and liked more. Meanwhile, Washington's Justice for All film continued its success and began to be shown as a strong candidate for the Oscar season. As the Oscar season approached, Washington was nominated for Best Actor. During the award season, Washington won many awards, including the Oscar. In his speech at the Oscar ceremony, Washington displayed a humble and thoughtful attitude. "I dedicate this award to everyone who stays true to their values, stands up for their principles, and doesn't forget to show respect to others while doing so." 1 year after the incident, Harvard University organized a Respect and Media Ethics Symposium. Both Washington and Kimmel were speakers at this event. Kimmel, in his speech, acknowledged how the incident had changed him. "Denzel Washington reminded me that I need to grow not just as a talk show host, but also as a human being. And I'm grateful for this lesson." The two men shook hands and embraced on stage. This moment symbolized how a tense encounter that had begun in a talk show studio a year ago had transformed into a constructive lesson about respect and responsibility. 5 years later, Netflix released a documentary titled The Power of Respect, examining how the Washington-Kimmel incident had created a cultural change. "This incident became much more than a talk show moment," said the documentary's director. "It was a turning point rarely seen in media history. Washington's calm but resolute stance influenced an entire industry. Denzel Washington's unforgettable lesson to Jimmy Kimmel had transformed from a television moment into a cultural phenomenon. This lesson had affected not just media professionals but ordinary people as well, creating a new awareness about respect, honesty, and values. And the foundation of all this was the stance of an actor who responded calmly but firmly to a talk show host's provocative comment. When Denzel Washington left the studio that night, he had left behind not just a talk show host who had learned his lesson, but a media world that was beginning to change and a society that was rediscovering the power of respect. Because true power lies not in shouting, getting angry, or belittling others. It lies in calmly, thoughtfully, and resolutely speaking the truth. And in that lesson Denzel Washington gave to Jimmy Kimmel, he had done exactly that.